It's hard to believe that at one point, these three characters were considered the weakest, yet over the course of their entire story, they eventually become the strongest. I absolutely adore this experience, but you might be surprised to know that this idea is a little bit more finicky, a little bit more meticulous than you would actually think. So I am trying to hit 200,000 subscribers before the end of the year. If you want to help me get there, consider subscribing. And if you enjoy the video or find yourself coming back on the regular, leave a like. I appreciate it immensely. If you don't know who these three characters are, this is Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, this is Yuji Itadori from Jujutsu Kaisen, and this is Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. These three characters have an obvious amount in common. They're all the main character, they all go from 0 to 100 over the length of their entire journey, but how they get there is what's different between them. Going from the weakest to the strongest isn't as simple as character progression or narrative progression, going from point A to point B to point C. While it does help progress the idea and the concept itself, there's a lot more difficulties, intricacies to navigate throughout the concept of taking a character from being weak to uber strong. If your story is naturally progressing down that path, you can think of it as the ship, the vessel that is going to carry this concept all the way to the end. But along that journey on that ship, there will be certain checkpoints, certain things that each of these characters will have to navigate around or eventually conquer or consume. One of the biggest consumptions for the weakest to strongest, especially in relation to power, is the fact that we're not just dealing with character progression. Character progression would be the umbrella term. Pretty much everything that you could think of goes within and underneath character progression. The weakest to strongest concept is relatively small, but if thought about, can be weaponized quite often. For example, a lot of the times you will see a version of this called the strongest. It's a concept of character that is very simple. They are the strongest thing in the story, and they usually serve as a pillar of sorts to not only guide the power system, your characters, but to also uphold the world and its structure around power. So if you have a story that navigates very heavily around a power system, then having the strongest concept is very vital. For Tokyo Ghoul, we have Arima. For Jujutsu Kaisen, we have Gojo. And for Attack on Titan, we have Yamiya, the original founding Titan. These three are considered pillars of their respective stories and represent, quote-unquote, the strongest. Now, a separate type of development will go in there, and how you utilize the strongest is different between every single story. But this is not what's important. What's important is eventually having the original weakest characters come up and meet the strongest. So if you want Kaneki, if you want Yuji, if you want Eren to ever be considered the strongest in the story, to represent that entire journey from weakest to strongest as a conceptual writing tool, you eventually have to get them to where they are. Now, when they do get there, there may be a couple of things that you have to decide. The original strongest either has to exit the story by force, by death, maybe they're sealed away, maybe they relinquish their power, maybe they even help the weak become the strong by replacing them, etc., etc. In some way, shape or form, that old pillar has to fall, and this new pillar has to be constructed on top of them. And there's a lot of very interesting ways that you can do that. Tokyo Ghoul takes its time building Kaneki very methodically through the stages of his ghoulification process. Ghoul abilities sit on a very wide spectrum. It's difficult to figure out who's actually strong and how far they can actually go. So you never really expect Kaneki to be the strongest. You never expect him to kind of rival the most powerful people in the story. But you do expect him to struggle, which is what the story provides him to be, a struggling character, the fool's journey, so to speak. Eventually, he does reach a point when it comes to Arima, who in the story is untouched. He is used as a very forceful gate for the rest of the ghouls within the story that cannot surpass him. But the author makes sure to not use him all too often. All things considered, Arima is kind of mysterious. He is used only when is necessary. He is the pinnacle of what power can be, and Kaneki will eventually have to replace him. But how he is replaced is not what you think. There's a fight within Tokyo Ghoul between Kaneki and Arima that is a very massive transition point. And mind you, this is a very massive development moment between both of these characters because they have a very strong relationship, the equivalent of a father and their son. But Arima understands that Kaneki needs to usher in a new world, and with that new world comes a title being known as the One-Eyed King. Arima knows that he cannot be active or alive for this to be possible. But when he fights Kaneki to push him past his limits, to make him become that title, he doesn't hold back. So you get this very vicious fight filled with a lot of power, a lot of complications, and a lot of emotions. But it's not Kaneki overpowering Arima. It's Arima accepting that Kaneki has finally made it to that level. Someone that can finally sit on the throne, and ends up taking his own life, taking the strongest concept out of the story and giving it to Kaneki. It's a very beautiful and poetic moment, arguably one of my favorites of this changing of titles, especially where Kaneki comes from as this meek college student to now someone that is ushering in a brand new world and has gone face to face with the strongest character in the story. From there, his powers escalate far beyond what you would ever expect. The peak of it is turning into this massive serpent-like creature that is the size of an entire city, coiling around skyscrapers, giving birth to these smaller, pure creatures that are absolutely annihilating everyone trying to fight back. Yuji's a little bit different though, but equally just as entertaining. The weirdest thing that comes with Yuji is that it takes him a lot of time to get running. And that might just come down to how Akatami writes his story, how he tends to write his characters, is that they take a little bit longer to actually get moving. And when I say moving, I'm not saying in the sense of development in general, but more so how their powers evolve over time. Yuji, all things considered, doesn't really have massive power bumps where you would normally think checkpoints should be throughout the entirety of Kaizen's run. Instead, it's more so in the back half of the story, the back quarter of the story even. Things become more viral, they become more condensed, they get more explosive than ever, and thus the evolution of said character, this being Yuji, has to respond. For Kaizen, Yuji does not have a similar 0 to 100 like Kaneki does. Instead, it is more simplified and more grounded, and more so falls within the response of what is necessary within these fights. A lot of the evolution of characters within Kaizen comes from how they are fighting another person, and if they need to adapt within the moment, then that is the best time to bring in power development. His fight with Chozo or Mahito, or even the end of the story with Sukuna alongside a lot of other people. The adaptability within the dance of battle is what is incredibly important for Kaizen. That evolution becomes glaringly apparent, and it's a powerful one. Kaizen does have the strongest though, obviously with Gojo, and eventually Yuji has to kind of get to the point of where Gojo was. But instead of the Arima situation with Kaneki, Gojo's version of the strongest does something a little bit different. Instead of one character meeting up to the strongest, you have multiple characters combining together to meet the strongest. It's not Yuji getting to the equivalent of Gojo's level, but instead everyone alongside him joining within the battle that can take care of a Gojo level threat. So once Gojo has been released from the story, the title is thus spread across all of his underlings that are now evolving within the dance of battle against arguably the most powerful threat within the story, being Sukuna. And it works really well that way because you get this chaotic, frenetic fight with all of these different people working their hardest and evolving within battle to actually win and come out on top, knowing that if one of them falls, the other needs to pick up the slack as much as possible, which even then forces more development into that character, in this case, Yuji. But that is not the end of Yuji. In Modulo, you see an even crazier version of him where you could now argue he is in Gojo's position. While it's not used the exact same way because the world is different now and the power and curse system is valued differently now, I would still consider Yuji as the strongest. And you see a very small example of what that looks like when he goes up against Mahito again and you see the power that he's actually capable of, or at least a fraction of it. He is a problem for a reason within Modulo, and a lot of people are scared of him. That leaves us with Eren. And the whole story of Eren Yeager is, funny enough, kind of a weird combination between Yuji and Kaneki. Not to say that it is inspired, but you can kind of bridge and reach over to enough connection to make it seem legitimate. Eren doesn't really have these big power boosts similar to Yuji throughout the story. He's actually quite stable, normal, drawn throughout. He becomes a Titan Shifter, and while he is a powerful Titan Shifter, it doesn't mean he's the strongest. That power doesn't really change all too much until you start implementing the Founding Titan and the extra ability that Eren Yeager has. While this does escalate him further and higher within the story, being a critical threat, where he is mostly considered dangerous is how he thinks about the world. how he's currently navigating politically and emotionally, and also the subsequent future foresights that he's getting through the paths themselves. Now, the path power is high concept, so Ymir herself I would consider personally being the strongest, but not in the way that is present within the story, but more so in the background lingered, but the power usage itself, anyone that connects to it, equally puts them on the strongest tier, that they are a force to be reckoned with. When Eren starts getting glimpses of the future, when he starts to move towards what that future will be, everything changes. And eventually he becomes a world-ending threat, the founding titan, where he is quite literally forming and constructing other titans out of his body. And this is all because of the power that he's managed to connect to in regards to Ymir and the paths. For all things considered with AOT, I enjoy Eren's conclusion, because it feels less power-orientated and people trying to overpower what seems to be the strongest, most impossible thing to do in all of the story, but instead it tried to get through to him mentally and emotionally. And throughout the story of AOT, you see the journey of Eren's mind and what he actually goes through and how he compartmentalizes stuff into different segments of his mind so he can make this rumbling a possibility. Yet he still knows in the end that his death is eventually coming. Again, while a lot of this is naturally woven throughout the narrative progression and general character progression, where they started and where they ended up is genuinely handled with a specific intention. This is rarely something that you want to wing or you want to try and gamble with, because you can lose sight of it incredibly easily and incredibly quickly. There are so many characters that sit within this category that are utilized in so many different ways, but these three for me definitely sit in the back of my mind with how they're utilized and how the author has gone about writing them to this degree.